Do you hear that? Okay. I hear that as well. Let's see. What could that be? So just so you know, we have had. We're in the middle of our systems getting evaluated and tweaked by a group out of Nicholasville called Pro Sound and Light. This is interesting. I wonder. I'm not exactly sure what that is. We'll see if it gets worse as we go. I can't tell if that's coming out of the speakers or somewhere out here. Can anybody tell? Is it out there? HVAC, maybe? I don't know. We'll see if it gets worse. Oh, it's gone. I don't know what that was. Wait, yeah, exactly. It respects the movement of Elizabeth. So, like, if that happens again, we will all, yes. Well, it's good to be back. Yeah, I'd gone for 2 Sundays, and was that you, Mariana, asked about Poland? So we're supposed to be in Poland. I think I mentioned, originally we were supposed to be Labor Day weekend in St. Louis to meet with good friends of ours, and that's when our friend Jessica very kind of tragically and suddenly passed away. But we had plans to be out Labor Day weekend, and then Tiffany got this opportunity to speak in Poland at a conference called Wet Pole, which is happens in different countries every other year, but it's kind of a collection of the world's wetland experts, and she'd accepted that, and so we were going to be leaving this past Friday originally to go to Poland and come back originally last night, but because of the way the funeral landed last Saturday, we weren't able to make it to Poland. It wasn't going to work. We weren't going to be able to catch a flight to get out there in time for her talk. So that didn't happen. Although, Wednesday morning, Tiffany started getting phone calls from University of Kentucky's International Affairs Office trying to track her down because they thought we were in Poland. And if you saw on the news, there were, I think, 19 drones, Russian drones, that kind of went into Polish airspace around the country. And had to be shot down, and so there was a very high alert, and so UK was trying to track her down to potentially begin evacuation plan to get her on and me on a plane, but luckily we weren't there. The conference still went on, so everything went okay, but it was kind of for a moment they were like, glad we're not in Poland, I guess, right now. So anyway, all that to say, did not get to make it, but I'm sure we'll have plenty more opportunities to speak internationally, I know. But anyway, so it is good to be back with you. And for those joining us on the live stream, let's say hello. So we are in 2 Corinthians. And so if you've got a Bible, feel free to turn to it. And if you need one, I can grab one for you. But where we left off, in 2 Corinthians was something that we're actually talking about during the service today in the sermon series, but it is about that collection that Paul was rounding up from different churches for the folks in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem church. Now remember, when we ended a couple weeks ago, Paul had been in this really kind of intense and fraught place with his relationship with the Corinthians, kind of on like its last strand. Him not wanting to kind of wash his hands of them, wanting to revive that relationship in some way. And then we learned that there is a visit from one of Paul's associates to the church in Corinth. They come back to Paul and report, hey, the Corinthians, like they're not ready for the relationship to end either. In fact, there's been some things they would like to repent of and say they're sorry for, that they haven't navigated this as well as they ought to have as well. And so Paul gets that news, is overjoyed by that news, because again, in Paul's mind, his ability to reconcile with this group of people, it's like a live laboratory for whether or not this gospel of God reconciling the world to Christ, like that massive macro thing, is supposed to find its expression in concrete ways in local churches, right? And so Paul feels like if he can't be reconciled in this very specific way to this group of people, like it's a failed witness to what he believes in his very bones is what God is doing through Jesus right now and what the vocation of the church is. And so he's just like overjoyed at this news that, hey, this relationship with this church is going to survive. And so then he goes into chapters 8 and 9, where he starts talking about the collection. And I think we joked that you can tell things must be in a better place when he starts pivoting towards asking for money. Like you got to be pretty secure in that relationship. And again, we'll talk more this morning in worship about that project. But it is, I think this collection that Paul is doing among his churches is one of the least known about projects in the New Testament, but of probably of greatest importance. Like I think there is so much to it, and Paul has so much writing on it, and it is such an example that's worth knowing intimately and following, that I wish it had much bigger spotlight. But basically, the friction that Paul is feeling with the Corinthians and the Galatians, I mean, this is all manifestations of the core tension with a lot of the Jesus movement in Jerusalem, especially with some of the leaders like James, the brother of Jesus, Peter, and others. And so Paul wants to get right at the core of this tension, of this widening chasm in the church between people who are on Paul's side, wanting Gentiles and Jews to be part of the Jesus following as a manifestation of like what Isaiah sees as like the nations coming and joining Israel in kind of this universal worship of God. Like Paul sees that unfolding here. And then others on the other side of the chasm in the Jesus movement saying, like the Jesus movement can take everybody, but one of the necessary steps is you've got to basically become Jewish in the way we have understood it first, and then you can follow Jesus. And so that's the big chasm in controversy, and it's massive. It's not just a theological one. It's mixed in with cultural differences, political differences. I mean, these are real fault lines with so much volatility in it. And so Paul really wants to get at the heart of that toxic and volatile mixture of these cultural, political, and theological differences that are just widening this chasm with ever-growing resentment and even violence that's even popping up in here. Paul wants to respond to that in a very radical way. He wants to do a collection of money for a period of time where people are passing the plates. Again, not for the poor in their own church necessarily, although I'm sure Paul expects them to care for their own. But he wants them to take kind of this extra offering so that he can combine it with the offering of all of the churches he's planted, and then take it to Jerusalem so that this part of the church, this other chasm of the church, other side of the chasm, will be bridged with this very radical, unique, unprecedented move of generosity and love that's just gushed out on the supposed church enemies. And Paul's kind of given everything to this. And so that's where we left off in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9. And we saw him talk about it in 1 Corinthians 16 and then also in Romans 15. In Romans 15, he asked the Romans not to contribute to it because he doesn't know those people as well, right? He didn't plant that church, but he does ask for their prayers because he's afraid that it's not going to go well. But yeah, it is a radical, you can't overemphasize how radical this project is and how novel it is. So, all right, so then that takes us to 2 Corinthians chapter, let's see, did we get into some of the defense in chapter 10? I think we might have. Let me. Would someone just start reading in chapter 10? I'd like to try to get through a good chunk of 2 Corinthians and read as much of what's left as possible. Would someone be willing just to basically read chapter 10, except where I maybe jump in and interrupt you?
I myself, Paul, appeal to you about the meekness and gentleness of Christ. I, who am humble when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away. I ask that when I am present, I need not show boldness by daring to oppose those who think we are acting according to human standards. Indeed, we live as human beings, but we do not wage war according to human standards. For the weapons of our warfare are not merely human, but they have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every proud obstacle raised up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to obey Christ. We are ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. Look at what is before your eyes. If you are confident that you belong to Christ, remind yourself of this, that just as you belong to Christ, so also do we. Now, even if I boast a little too much of our authority, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for tearing you down, I will not be ashamed of it. I do not want to seem as though I am trying to frighten you with my letters. For they say his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. Let such people understand that what we say by letter when absent, we will also do when present. We do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves. But when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they do not show good sense. We, however, will not boast beyond limits, but will keep within the field that God has assigned to us to reach out even as far as you. For we were not overstepping our limits when we reached you. We were first to come all the way to you with the good news of Christ. We do not boast beyond limits, that is, in the labors of others, but our hope is that as your faith increases, our sphere of action among you may be greatly enlarged, so that we may proclaim the good news in lands beyond you, without boasting of the work already done in someone else's sphere of action. Let the one who boasts in the Lord, for it is not those who commend themselves that are approved, but those whom the Lord commends.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm just curious, as you take in that chapter, is there any detail or dynamic that really jumps out at you? Yeah. And what he quotes some of the charges that's coming from them, right? What's he say? It's like, bro, your letters they pack a punch. Like, they're harsh, they're, goodness, they're forceful. But when you're here standing among us, you're like, you seem weak, especially compared to some of the teachers that have been coming in like, blah, here I am, hear the word of the Lord, and Paul's just like, the substance is the same. I'll put it to you on paper or parchment. I'll put it to you face to face. Like, the word's the same, right? Yeah. Any other dynamic come up or detail that's like, that's a head scratcher, or that's interesting? Notice how many times he uses the word boasting. We will not boast like others. We could boast but will not. Like that comes up a lot. Which, where there's smoke, there's fire. So, right? So what's going on here? I do think that one of the inferences you can make is that some of the teachers that have come to discredit Paul, they boast, quite an impressive list of references, right? So much that they ask Paul for his. They boast with some pretty powerful rhetoric and speaking ability, a presence. they boast in maybe some of the successes and what has happened in the church. You can even imagine a boasting about, we've managed to do some great work for the Lord and haven't once landed in prison like Paul has over and over. So like Paul is referencing boasting. We will not boast. I could boast, but will not. He's drawing a contrast. And the way that I kind of read that, this side, again, you're getting one side of the telephone call here, one side of the letter correspondence, but the reason he does it so much is because he's trying to counteract an opposition that's quite boastful, at least in his eyes. So let's go to chapter 11, and now we're going to learn about who are these teachers, these boastful teachers. Would someone start reading in 2 Corinthians 11? Just kind of keep going. Can we just pause there for a second? What's the portrait that Paul is painting of these opponents, these opposing teachers that have come into Corinth? Yeah, he draws an analogy, basically calling them the serpent in the garden, right? Yeah, they're coming in seemingly innocent, dangling this kind of fruit that sure looks good, it seems okay, and Paul's like, but they are representations of not just my enemies, but God's enemies. So that's pretty forceful. Yeah. What else is a part of this, do you see? What about that term he uses for them in verse 5? Yeah, does somebody else's translation have a different way of referring to them? Does everybody say super apostles? That's a pretty good rendering of it. Most eminent apostles or the highly esteemed ones. He's making fun of them, right? Like this is, they come in all like the peacock apostle with like the feathers to impress and like strut in there, and he's just like, look at you, right? And he's like poking at it as a way of saying like, don't be fooled by this. It's all of the outward signs that seem impressive may not actually be an accurate way of revealing the truthfulness of the message. And then he goes on, again, drawing his contrast to himself. If they're the super apostles, he's like the foolish, weak apostle. And so watch what he does here. It's actually this is where Paul kind of enters his stand-up comedy phase. Would you mind to keep reading there in verse 16? All right, so let's stop there. So here, so you have to understand, like in Paul's, in this Greco-Roman culture, there is being able to be honored for your accomplishments is quite a value, right? So if you have inscripted in a monument, say your status of what you did, your official position in the city, or what you did for a region, there can be these apostles that come in sort of like. Kind of like with resumes full of their achievements, what they've done to impress. Like this would have been like being able to be impressed by good and solid achievements. Like that would fit right in line with what's normal here and what would seem to validate someone. But Paul kind of does the exact opposite. It would kind of be like if I'd showed up here almost 4 years ago, and in my trial sermon, you know how it works. You've got a preacher about to be hired, and then the final step is kind of like your tryout preaching, right? And then it's always a very awkward thing to prepare for, I'll tell you. But imagine a preacher doing their trial sermon gets up and says, well, I remember when I flunked out of seminary my first year, Jesus really taught me the value of humility. And then I remember getting fired by my first 2 churches because I just couldn't show up on Sundays. I slept right through my alarm. After a few weeks, they just let me go. But God really taught me to persevere. Like Paul's like doing this kind of ironically, like he's saying, yeah, well, let's go down to some things. I got some things that I can impress you with. He's like, I've been lacerated more times than I can count. I've been imprisoned. I've faced hunger. I've been run out of town. Let me say, how many times have I been in jail? Can you remember how many times we've been in jail? I can't even remember now. He's like, and this is really funny. N.T. Wright makes this point that if you're a Roman soldier, one of the honors that you can get is that if you kind of are sieging a city and lift a ladder up on the wall and then make it over the wall, be the first to crown the wall and survive, that there's a particular honor that goes with that. And Paul kind of like winks at that kind of honor and says, when things got really bad in Damascus, I was the first to escape over the wall in the city and get out of town. Like it's just full of irony where he is just saying over and over and over all of the things in just this insane litany of things that would just cause people to just be like, what is wrong with you, right? And he kind of just goes on because he wants the contrast to be fierce with these super apostles. He really, they're saying the things about him as a way of invalidating his message and his authority. And Paul's like, he's kind of owning all of it and saying, yes, absolutely, absolutely, because the way that you sort of understand truth as we know it in Christ has to be filtered through the prism of a cross. And there's not a lot that's impressive about that. There's not a lot that screams success like that. Like everything is flipped on its head. And so Paul is really, really, really trying to amp up that contrast as a way of like owning the argument of the super apostles, but flipping it on its head. Any thoughts about that? Comments about that before we keep going? He's spicy. It's a spicy guy. He's a spicy apostle. Yeah. Huh? Interesting. So if Paul's basically saying, it's kind of like the person that's like, what's your greatest attributes? Like my humility, right? It's just like, well, I feel like that kind of like takes away from, so you point out something quite good, I think, that doesn't sound super humble. Yeah, okay. Dave, were you getting ready to say something? Yeah.
This shows a very human side of Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Not very attractive.
Mm.
And I think a bigger man would have said, all right, let's look at what these super apostles,
Mm-hmm.
ridiculed him and sent him, are trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a way
feels like he's laying bare his insecurities. Yeah, yeah.
The ridicule that's not making at all, that's not appropriate for a person of his station, but he just can't seem to stop himself.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good observation. Well, and it does sound, remember earlier I mentioned that, a number of scholars see Second Corinthians as kind of like stitching together of different letters so that it's not like one coherent letter like First Corinthians, but it's like pieces or fragments of like ongoing correspondence. And one of the things you could point to for that is like, well, earlier in Second Corinthians, near the beginning, Paul basically says, I know that there's somebody among you that's kind of been a part of the opposition and like really taken some pretty heated shots at me, and like gotten themselves in hot water with the church. Forgive them. Like don't excommunicate him. Don't push him out. Forgive him. Accept him. Right? That feels different than this, right? Like so you can kind of see why some people sort of see the pretty radical changes in tone, even on similar subjects, as evidence for why this may be different pieces of different correspondences in time. So.
If nothing else, it does illustrate that even somebody with all the human frailties that are on exhibition in this can still be a pretty exalted leader, communicator in service of Christ. So maybe that's why this was included.
Say that again. Now it's like it shows that like.
It shows that even somebody with all the human frailties of Paul,
Mm,
who is, the guy,
yeah.
second only to Jesus in the New Testament for bringing the faith to the Gentiles, that it's a message to people that are wanting to be in service to Christ, that it's okay. You can have
I see.
a real leader
Mm,
that still has all these human frailties. You don't have to be perfect.
gotcha. Yeah. An important role. Like you can have a pretty important role and still be completely saturated with the human, like shortcomings and insecurities and everything. Paul's Exhibit A, right? Yeah, and we see that all throughout. Remember, as we were journeying through the Hebrew Scriptures, really not worried about like shielding the human and kind of like elements of the story that kind of puts the Israelites in negative light, right? I mean, if anything, it kind of like shines a big spotlight on a lot of the weaknesses and downfalls, and maybe the New Testament's not a lot different. Maybe those human frailties and shortcomings, they shine through. But I do think it's a really good point, though, to say like, hey, you can read in the Holy Bible, right, and see someone like St. Paul, but you can see he's just a guy. Like, he is a guy who is like, these super apostles are so under his skin and ruining his relationships and the work. Like, it's just, right? He's got raw nerves, and there are people that know exactly where to grab hold of him, and you can see that. So I think it's a really good observation that, these very human elements, they really pop. So, it's a great question. So, there's a lot of theories that that Paul may have been engaged at one time, and with his radical turn in his life, that maybe that made it so that marriage did not happen. At the very least, we know that Paul, in writing in 1 Corinthians, I believe it's chapter 7, he's talking about marriage, and he basically says to them, by the way, this doesn't show up in a lot of like premarital classes in churches, but Paul basically says to the Corinthians, like, I'd prefer you to be single like me. Like, honestly, like if you want to know like the best path, you should probably just be single. Then you can be like laser focused on following Jesus. He's like, but if you're burning with passions, it's probably best to get married, like as like a second resort. Like, and that's basically his defense of marriage in 1 Corinthians 7, which I think is hilarious. But that's an example where he basically says outright he is single. So, yeah. That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe. But I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with like Catholic theology to know if that was an important justification for celibacy of the priesthood. I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe somebody else might know. But yeah, he was. Yeah. Shall we keep going? We're almost near the end here. Let's see. Where did we leave off? Verse 10. Chapter 12, verse 10. All right. Let's see. I'll start up in verse 11 here. Chapter 12, verse 11. I have made a fool of myself, but you drove me to it. I mean, this guy. Seriously, like, what is up with you? I ought to have been commended by you, for I am not in the least inferior to the super apostles, even though I am nothing. I persevered in demonstrating among you the marks of a true apostle, including signs, wonders, and miracles. How were you inferior to the other churches, except that I was never a burden to you? Forgive me this wrong. By the way, one of the charges that they're making towards him, some of these super apostles, is that he's basically robbed some of these places that have financially supported him, you know. And Paul is answering that. He's like, if I was in this to basically form these communities and bleed them dry of money, like, why didn't I do that for you? Like, I didn't ask you, I didn't squeeze you for money for myself. But you can see in the context of him trying to squeeze them for money for Jerusalem, they're playing on those suspicions, right? Fanning the flame of them. Let's see, verse 12. I persevered in demonstrating among you the marks of a true apostle, including signs, wonders, and miracles. How are you inferior to the churches, except that I was never a burden to you? Forgive me this wrong. Now I am ready to visit you for the third time. I will not be a burden to you, because what I want is not your possessions, but you. After all, children should not have to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. So I will very gladly spend for you everything I have and expend myself as well. If I love you more, will you love me less? Be that as it may, I have not been a burden to you. Yet crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery. Did I exploit you through any of the men I sent to you? I urged Titus to go to you, and I sent our brother with him. Titus did not exploit you, did he? Did we not walk in the same footsteps by the Spirit? Have you been thinking all along that we have been defending ourselves to you? We have been speaking in the sight of God as those in Christ, and everything we do, dear friends, is for your strengthening. For I am afraid that when I come, I may not find you as I want you to be, and you may not find me as you want me to be. I fear that there may be discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder. I am afraid that when I come again, my God will humble me before you, and I will be grieved over many who have sinned earlier and have not repented of the impurity, sexual sin, and debauchery in which they have indulged. So here we see Paul, again, while you might see that there could be an ongoing correspondence that represents different times, it's like, well, it was just right before chapters 8 and 9 that they seemed to be good, right? It seemed like they were, like the Corinthians were like, we're sorry, are we good? And Paul's like, we're good, right? You know, but now it's just like Paul's just like, oh my gosh, like I can't, when I show up for my third visit, like is it going to be a dumpster fire? Because right now it feels like it's going to be a dumpster fire, right? Like that's what he's saying right now, right? So it's like as the world turns with Paul's Corinthian relationship, right? It's just, what a roller coaster. What an absolute roller coaster. By the way, I always find it interesting when in my growing up, I was always told that the blueprint for what church ought to be was to follow if you could like import the New Testament and all of its depictions of church into like a step-by-step plan, that's like the blueprint for what church ought to be. We got to restore the New Testament church. And like as I would get older, I'm just like, are we reading the same Bible here? Like what do you want this? Like this is, like, I think we've done it. Like there's a lot of drama and fighting in here. I think we got it. We're good. Like we've restored the New Testament church. So anyways, I always thought that's funny. All right. Let's see. By the way, there are other parts of it that I think are very much worth modeling, but we got to keep a pretty sober view of the human elements that are very much on display in the church world in the New Testament. Okay, 2 Corinthians 13. Would someone be willing to finish this out here?
Third time might be any charge must be sustained by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. I warned those who sinned previously and all the others, and I warn now, I'll ask you, as I did when I present on my second visit, that if I come again, I will not be lenient. Choose our proof that Christ is speaking in me. He is not weak in dealing with you, but is powerful in you. For he was crucified in weakness, but lives by the power of God. For we are weak in him, but in dealing with you, we will live with him by the power of God. Examine yourselves to see whether you are living in faith. Test yourselves. Do you not realize that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test? I hope you will find out that when we did not fail. But we pray to God that you may not do anything wrong, not that we may appear to prevent the test, that you may do what is right, though we may seem to have failed. For we cannot do anything against the truth, but only for the truth. For we rejoice when we are weak and you are strong. This is what we pray for, that you may become perfect. So I write these things while I am away from you, so that when I come, I may not have to be severe in using the authority the Lord has given me for building up and not tearing down. Finally, brothers and sisters, farewell. Put things in order, listen to my appeal, agree with one another, live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the saints greet you. The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with all of you.
And that's the end. That's the end of the correspondence that we know of with the Corinthians. Yeah? What kind of warning? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, it does, doesn't it? He keeps referencing that throughout the correspondence. Remember, like even in 2 Corinthians 8, where he's talking about the collection, he's like, I could order you to do this. I've got the authority, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to ask you politely, right? It's like he keeps referencing, I have this authority. I'm not using it to the full extent that I could, but I've got it. Like he keeps, even at the very end, yeah. What do you make of that? That the person who has that authority doesn't have to say it. So maybe there is rhetorically, he's trying to like build his authority. Yeah, cement it. Talking about, say that again. Did he visit 3 times? Yeah, he's saying like he's getting ready to visit a 3rd time. So his own visit, not counting the folks that he sent. Yeah, like Titus. Yeah. It depends on like so he doesn't say exactly in his letters, Acts gives an account of his journeying and how long he's in one place. So if you take that as a cue, he could stay in places for like up to 18 months and then move on. So yeah, I mean, I don't think these are short visits. Again, travel in the ancient world, I mean, you're kind of taking up residence and doing your thing and then kind of planning for where you're going to land next with letters that are slow. And yeah, so, but I think this 3rd visit these are extended stays. Yeah.
Was this letter like this sent by a person that Paul authorized to take it there? Or was there some kind of system by which letters were delivered? Or was it an informal, hey, there's people traveling on this route, and it was part of an obligation to travel to do this,
Mm-hmm.
to take it?
Yeah, well, I know for Paul, I know the typical thing would be for him to send a letter with a trusted person that he commends, and there's certainly there's certainly precedent for that in other forms of official communications. But you all may know Hayes family. Y'all are the historians. I'm not aware of any kind of like Roman equivalent of a postal service. But was there anything like that, or is it more just if you had a communication to send, you had to send it with someone that you trusted to send the communication? I think that's how they. Yeah. That's as far as I know, yeah. I'm not any historian, so that's why I defer to any kind of historian. So, but yeah. Yeah. So, it's a great point. So if you've got such a massive swath of the population can't even write necessarily, writing letters and sending them would be a very small slice of society that could and would do that. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Never know what's still out there. Well, I'll just end with this. I think for Paul, one of the ways that I kind of use this let me just say, I aspire to use this in kind of all arenas of life, but I certainly apply it to when, like, reading Scripture, is that I tried to use what I was taught by a professor named Warren Smith, an ancient church historian, in my first semester of seminary. He taught us what he called a hermeneutic of charity when reading like ancient church theologians, reading Scripture, when talking to your uncle that spouts off on Facebook at Thanksgiving, to use the same hermeneutic of charity in all these realms of discussion and reading. And I try to apply it to Paul. So I'm not ignoring the human elements that are very much there in Paul. In fact, I'm trying to be very clear-sighted about what they are. But I am trying to see what is there, what kind of picture of the gospel is he portraying, what kind of message is he trying to say, and rather than find all of its weakest points, or rather than try to find all of the parts of his character that shines through that I think are easily attacked, I'm trying to find the core message there. And then wherever there are weak spots, try to make it stronger so that the substance of his ideas and message there are in its best possible light. And then I engage the substance of his message at only that level. And then if there's critiques, if there's disagreement, so be it. But I have done the work to try to understand the message in the context of his life as best as I possibly can. And the same goes for when reading a book of an author with a perspective that just does not immediately register as something that I agree with. But trying to get to the heart of the message, and rather than attack it at its weak points, build up this straw man and slash it down, to try to even build up the argument or the idea in its best possible light and only engage it in its best possible form, and then go through it. And I really think in face-to-face communication, what Dr. Smith told us is that if you can take the time to use the hermeneutic of charity and listen closely enough so that you can repeat back to the person talking to you exactly what they're trying to say, even if you can even help improve it, but if you can just repeat back to them so that they understand you've listened, and that you're not going after the weak points, but you've listened and you understand them. That even if you ultimately disagree, that they will at least know that you love me enough to have truly listened. And like Warren Smith would say, that is a key part of loving your neighbor that is sorely needed. That could be a powerful witness if you could love your neighbor by listening well and then engaging well with the best possible form of the substance of what they think. And so I really, I'm trying to do that with reading Paul, and even in engaging folks in pretty fraught conversations about our world right now. Listen to understand and engage as an act of love, even if it means disagreement at the end. At least the person you're with knows you've cared enough to listen deeply. That's powerful. That's powerful. So, so next week we'll continue on. And any final comments, questions before we leave? Okay. All right. Thank you all very much.